topics will come up. So please stay tuned. We will be right back.
Great.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. Did you enjoy my new opening video? I hope you did. Thank you so much again for the music from Hiko Simon, free downloads from SoundCloud. And I have a new microphone, so hopefully it sounds nice. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. We are live out to Facebook, YouTube, not Instagram. We are on Twitch and Periscope for a little bit longer. So thank you so much for joining. If you have some questions or comments for us along the way, make sure you write them below and I'll try to add them in. So Justin, thank you so much for joining.
Good morning. Morning. How you doing?
I'm good. This is great. The first of the year. You are episode number 169.
You did that, which means you did this 169 times between
started end of April last year, and then until now. Crazy.
That's incredible.
Exciting.
That is an achievement, and I had no idea that this would be the first one of the year. So I feel honored. I have to step up my game a little bit here this morning.
No, you've got so much insight to share with us. Thank you so much. And I have interviewed so many people in the series who are connected and collaborating with you in so many ways. So I'm sure a lot of familiar names will also come up. So can we start by just a short bio about you? So you grew up in Washington State, is that right?
Yeah. I grew up in Washington State, suburb of Seattle, 20 minutes outside the city. It's exactly what you envision it to be, for better or for worse. I feel like I was pretty lucky. I had no real connection with Japan. I ended up coming here. Initially, it would have been at the very, very end of university. More than anything, I just wanted an excuse to travel. I had kind of caught the travel bug. I wanted to study abroad. I didn't have any plans to go to Japan. I applied super late. They told me I couldn't go anywhere. I said, please send me somewhere. They said, we might be able to send you here. I said, great, I'll take it. By the way, where's there? There happened to be Osaka. And long story short.
Wow,
yeah.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. So now that's kind of the long story, or sort of the short version of kind of how I ended up here initially. But yeah, I've been here now for
15 years.
Yeah, probably something like that. I came back and forth on and off for one reason or another over a period of about 4 or 5 years. And then I've been here almost entirely straight since 2007, 2008, something like that. So I've kind of quit counting. But yeah, collectively, it's probably 14, 15 years or so.
And the best place for people to find out more about you, I'm putting up your Instagram and your homepage and your Twitter and Facebook, but probably your homepage is the best place to send people?
Yeah, probably not actually. It hasn't
really?
It's not even. Calling it a homepage is probably only semi-accurate. It was more something. I had ambitions for another little project, and part of that project was kind of teaching myself web design, and due to a number of reasons, all of a sudden it had to serve several purposes. So it's been kind of shoehorned into that. And left there for a couple of years. So
it's still a good launching page, and that's where I found you. I was able to contact you through the website.
Yeah.
Where would you say is your most relevant or most recent information that you're putting?
Oh gosh, not really anywhere, to be honest. Like I kind of maybe I would have said my personal Instagram account, but that got hijacked about a year ago and I can't get it back. They're apparently not doing anything shady with it. I just can't get it back. It's still there. So I keep getting tagged. My name changed and I keep getting tagged in things and I'm just like, well, I'm just observing my actions throughout the world.
Wow.
And
so I'm glad
anyway,
I get to interview you because there's a lot that we don't know yet.
Yeah.
There's a lot people can't find maybe.
Yeah, I need to spend probably more time putting information out into the world, but yeah, it takes a lot of time to do that, and I try to
It
spend a little bit more
definitely
time.
does.
I'm pretty lucky. I've got a lot of folks around me that I enjoy spending time with, so I try to invest a bit more of my time there. So that's right. It's always a balance, right?
It is. It
There's
is. I saw a quote from you that if you could choose what to do, especially during coronavirus, probably, you just like to grow rice and brew sake and
yeah,
spend your
absolutely.
days with your family. That
Pretty
sounds really
much.
nice. Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. My goal is, yeah. A lot of people ask me, oh, what do you have plans to go and set up a brewery overseas, or are you starting your own label or something like that? And no, actually, I've more than anything, I'm just trying to figure out how to retire at 50 and make sake and grow rice. That's if I feel like if
Sounds
I can
nice.
if I can achieve that, I've probably helped get the industry as a whole into a pretty good place where something like that is feasible, because right now it's not. So if I can achieve that, I've got, well, a little over 10 years here, 10 years or so, about exactly 10 years. So we'll see how that plays out.
That sounds great. Let's go back a little bit to give people
Yeah,
an idea of what you have done, because you might be talking about retiring and brewing sake at 50, but you actually did it yourself, right? You
yeah,
worked with a local brewer in Chiba. You're in Chiba
yeah,
Prefecture, right?
yeah,
And you
yeah,
did the process yourself. It's not
yeah.
easy, is it?
No, it's not. Well, I mean, a lot of people, times the focus is on the physical demand of it. The physical demand is, I mean, you get used to it, and honestly, you start doing it. Sure, the first 2 weeks, month are a little bit rough, but you get used to it. The early hour, everybody says, "Oh, you have to get up early, and you have to." It's such hard work. It is, but humans are pretty amazing in their ability to adapt to these things. Believe it or not, we're actually kind of made to do things like this, and so that part's easy. The hardest part is just being, I mean, you're essentially shut away from the world for, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, and it's a very different, how should I say, it's a very different culture, in a lot of ways. And so, being entrenched in that while having to, set aside a lot of other communities or special people during that time. That's probably the hardest part. The physical part, it actually feels fantastic. I feel better getting up at 5 every morning and working my ass off until 6 in the afternoon, and just staying on top of that for day after day after day. You kind of start to feel incredible. It's some of the best I've ever felt in my entire life. So yeah, but I did that for a couple of years, full on for two, I guess you could call them seasons, as the brewing season here is, or at least in a lot of smaller producers, is finite, usually from late autumn to early spring. So I did that for two full seasons here at a place called KidoIzumi, out on the peninsula here. That I'm out on the Chiba Peninsula, actually. I escaped Tokyo a few years ago. And did that for a few years there. I did a short stint up in Yamagata, a place called Mitobe Shuzo. They make some sake called Yamagata Masamune. And then just this year, it's not long enough to call it any sort of experience, but I did go and spend a week at a place out in Tottori, place called Ota Shuzo that makes some sake called Benten Musume, which is really, really fantastic. And so, yeah, it's I yeah, it's very I enjoy that process and that place a great deal. And so my right now, I haven't really been all that full on for about the last 2 years, and with regards to the actual physical brewing so much. But I'm working on a way to get back there, a means to get back there in a way that's, I say, sustainable, for both myself, my family, as well as whatever brewery or breweries it is I'm involved with. So yeah, trying to figure out what that looks like. So
That's
we'll
great.
see.
And let's give a shout out to KidoIzumi brewery a little bit. So they are one of the few sake breweries that I've seen in Japan which has like a naturally cultivated rice sake. So it's like an organic sake as
Yeah,
well as a vintage sake and
yeah,
sparkling sake. So that's what I'm showing on screen right now
okay,
from their
yeah,
website.
yeah, yeah. I mean, gosh, it depends on how deep you want to get into it. I would say they were one of the earliest breweries that tried to figure out how to come up with a solution for an additive free sake, something that is closer to what was done prior. So, at what line do you define organic or natural? Just like anything in the world, whether it be wine or your food or anything, there are a lot of lines that you can draw. At what point do you define something as, natural or organic or, biodynamic or whatever you want to call it. I'd say KidoIzumi is pretty exceptional in that. There are other places that do exceptional work as well. But with regards to aged sake, they were also one of the ones to work to bring that back. So there's a whole ton of fantastic sake kicking around that brewery that's been, kicking around there for 20, 30, 40 years. That's really fantastic. That's something that most places do not have. And that's a really incredible and beautiful part of sake culture that was largely forgotten for a long period of time, and they were sort of one of the ones that really doubled down on the importance of that really, really early on. And so yeah, there's a handful of kind of projects in the work trying to I should say reposition long-term aged sake in the market, both in Japan and internationally. And KidoIzumi is very involved in helping see that out. And so, yeah, they do a lot of exciting stuff. Sparkling sake. Everybody in the world has a sparkling sake of some sort right now, and there's a lot of different ways to go about making that happen. And so kind of the industry as a whole is trying to suss out what that looks like. KidoIzumi has one, but it's not necessarily exemplary of their style, I'd say. But it's the aged sake, the more natural processes with regards to, brewing, producing the starter, and relationships with farmers, usually using naturally cultivated rice and things like that. They're very early on, and it's something they've stuck through even in the hard times when nobody else was doing it. And so I'm very, very lucky to have that be my home court, I guess you could say. I live 10 minutes from the brewery now, so I'm still down there for one reason. Even though I'm not brewing right now, I'm still down there for one reason or another, on and off, and yeah, popping in to help out here and there. So yeah, it's kind of like family.
And you have done workshops and training for guides about brewery visits or vintage sake or different kinds of sake. You are an expert on many levels for fermentation and sake. It sounds like in one of your interviews you were talking about really getting excited about fermentation from trying to brew your own sake. Is that right?
Not so much through trying to brew my own sake. I got really excited about it through meeting incredible producers of not just sake, but soy sauce, miso, a lot of those things. Koji makers. I didn't even, 12 years ago or whatever, the idea of something like koji, that was vocabulary that didn't even exist for me. And, discovering what that was and the role that played, not just functionally, but say socially, culturally, on a lot of levels. It defines Japanese food and cuisine in a lot of ways, and it's something that a lot of people talk about, and Japan is undervalued, and is undervaluing across the board, which is a shame. And yeah, kind of discovering that was and what that world was and what that entailed. It was eye-opening and inspiring. And so yeah, that's kind of what initially got me into sake and some of those other things. But then yeah, from them I don't brew my own sake. It's illegal in Japan. I can't do that. But I do make koji and do koji making workshops and things, both here in Japan as well as overseas. Just because I think it's empowering. I mean, the idea of anybody who's worked with any chef or anybody who's comfortable in the kitchen. I think I I can't cook anything. I'm a horrible cook, but I imagine that's incredible, a rather empowering skill to have, just to be able to take what's available and create something that's wholesome and nutritional and tasty, and it brings a lot to to people to be able to put that on the table, and so but fermentation as well is also very empowering, and to be able to take something in a very simple state and actually be involved in the process of it transforming, and you're technically hands off. It goes for koji making or sake making. You're not really making anything. It's more, how do you cultivate an environment where something can thrive, and I think that there's and I guess that's kind of how I see, I guess, my role anyway, because I can't really make anything. I'm not that artistic or whatever. I'm not an engineer. I can't, up here and in this hand, they don't communicate all that well. So whatever I'm envisioning here, it doesn't translate through to here. But I feel like I'm in a position to help empower people who can make great things, and yeah, and for me, fermentation was kind of a very direct sort of through line to that, and it helped me sort of see that and not see it, I guess, because there's so much, there's only so much you can see. You have to rely on so many how should I say, very vital, organisms. There are so many things involved in this process, and it's a beautiful process. And the fact that those things can happen, then it can result in something that is delicious and, unique to the person, the family, the region. It's just really beautiful. And so, yeah. Anyway,
you talk about really discovering fermentation and the beauty of natural, simple home cooking style Japanese food through your wife, who was your girlfriend, and then experiencing that food. And how before that you were kind of a junk food junkie, growing up until your 20s, and then feeling so much better. Can you tell us about that journey a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think my diet growing up was necessarily unique. I guess it was probably exemplary of just about probably 80% of children in my, how should I say, my socioeconomic zone, from where I was growing up. It was probably, there's probably a lot of people out there who have a very shared experience. So I never really thought anything of it, but it was, it was kind of before coming to Japan, in kind of my early 20s, I started just kind of treating my own body as kind of a test subject, with regards to a lot of different, not diet for the sake of losing weight, but different sorts of diets and health exercise regimens, prior to coming to Japan, and realized that, by putting in enough time and effort, I can help myself to feel really good, but it just wasn't accessible. It wasn't feasible in any real way, at least where I was in the US. And, being from Seattle, arguably we have access to a lot of things, financial access, that's another, issue altogether. But, just in general, they have better access to good food than arguably probably a lot of people. There's choices out there. But then combining that with time spent doing, whether it's swimming or cycling or hiking or all these other things, the amount of time and energy and resources that it took to keep feeling well was just, if you have a job or any other sort of responsibility, it was just not feasible. And so I was almost worse off, I realized, trying to even achieve any sort of, healthy stability, because it ended up disrupting so many other things. Those things didn't fit together. And so, and coming to Japan, I just sort of realized, without necessarily pursuing any real, what should I say, any exceptional diet, by just essentially going with the flow and just committing to eating what was put out in front of me, I realized I just started feeling a lot better. Not perfect, but a heck of a lot better. And that was that was nice. That was really nice. And then, through meeting my eventual wife, she's, so her family, her mother's from Aomori, her father's from Miyazaki. So she grew up in Kanagawa, but she had two very distinct sort of food cultures sort of influencing her home. And then her parents ran a bento shop and udon place, and so she essentially grew up in the kitchen, as well as with those recipes, and with that food. And so in meeting her, and us living together, I started encountering things that nobody ever served me at an izakaya, or nobody ever served, just simple things, that were exceptionally more delicious. And I was like, so this is way better than all the stuff I've been eating for the last, 3 or 4 years or whatever since I've been here. Why is this not available to people? Why is this not, part of the experience? And then, and just her general interest in food, and my just general interest in food and in beverage, just became something that we were able to share, and exploring, international cuisine and food along with local food throughout Japan. That was just something we're able to sort of share and explore together. And then eventually, professionally, my work brought me into a position where I was interacting very directly with producers of all different scale, of all different sorts of food products all around Japan, on a very, very regular basis. And so that was sort of the impetus for me discovering, for lack of a better word, real, or very, very, how should I say, tradition. I don't know if traditional is the right word or real is the right word or whatever, but ingredients crafted in a manner that are very considerate to the resources being used, and the knowledge and craft that had been passed down, for generations. And then and then a big part of that was then fermentation, became a big part of that. That's what I discovered in that, and started feeling a heck of a lot better. And then so that was sort of, light bulb kind of clicked, and
That's great. There's an excellent interview with you with the Japan Times years ago, where you talk about working in a Tokyo restaurant that helps to promote rural areas and local farmers and local produce. And there's also a quote about fermentation, and you say it's not about sake, it's more about the concept around fermentation, how we coexist with things, and a philosophy related to that, how that ties to building community, working with one another. So that's key for sustainability on many levels, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's just, for me, I just, that idea, just sort of, I'm not, even if it's not something I'm super conscious of every day, but that's something that's kind of, I guess you could say, hovering kind of right back here, that is sort of the underlying theme, I guess, for a lot of the work I try to, that I'm involved in, and try to support, is that it's, there's not a silver bullet, right? There are a lot of pieces to the puzzle, and all those different parts have a very important role to play. And it's interesting, you look at fermentation, and something that could be considered dangerous or unhealthy or not very useful, planted into a very different environment with other organisms or whatever around it, all of a sudden that same microbe or whatever can flourish, right, in a way that it can have all kinds of positive effects. And I think that's very true of, I think a lot of people, or a lot of, I think there are a lot of parallels to that. There's not necessarily one right, wrong, bad, good, but nurtured and in the right environment, I think anybody can have or anybody, anything, any organism, whatever you want to call it, can really flourish and thrive. And so and it's so trying to select one or the other becomes, in the end, you end up missing out, I think, on a lot of really important pieces of the puzzle. And so how do you integrate those things? And that's a challenge. It's not easy, but it's important, I think.
Yeah. It looks like a pivotal collaboration that you've had is with Umari Inc.
Yeah.
And can you tell us about some of your projects with them?
Yeah. So Umari is it's hard to explain. It's sort of like more of a secret society than than anything else. But it's um, so that is a company that still exists. Is actually the president of that is a gentleman by the name of Hima Furuta, who is um, got his hands in all kinds of things related to work of this nature. I don't know if sustainability is the right word, but very, very thoughtful work as to how to um, take the resources in Japan and in the city and internationally, and how to connect those in meaningful ways. And anyway, it was getting connected there that all of a sudden I was then placed in a position where I was traveling a lot and visiting a lot of different not just food producers, but working between, I might be spending time with local chefs or food producers or rice growers or whatever in a certain area, and at the same time working between government or large corporations or mid to small to mid-sized businesses as well. And it wasn't sort of a matter of who is right, who is wrong. It's sort of a matter of the idea is that what's the best way I can explain this? Sorry, I usually I don't talk about this stuff in English all that often, so it's kind of I have to wake my brain up a little bit. At the end of the day, I feel like there's probably not a need to create something new in a lot of scenarios. There's actually a whole lot of really amazing stuff out there, and for those individuals who are in Japan or have spent a significant amount of time in Japan and to travel to rural areas and spent time with the people or the food or the communities have probably recognized that. A lot of that stuff is not necessarily accessible to the common traveler or tourist or whatever, but there are incredible things being made by incredible people who work in beautiful communities that are incredibly supportive and that are really exemplary in a lot of ways. And however, a lot of those communities are not necessarily able to continue to thrive in a way because the thing that they're doing is underappreciated, both locally as well as on a national scale. They just do not have through decades of a lot of circumstances, a lot of these really special things have fallen out of fashion or they're not being utilized in the same way that they used to be. However, arguably, a lot of those things are just as important or more important than they've ever been. And so, a lot of times the focus is on making something new. However, I feel like kind of through Umari, sort of what the overall, I say, what's the word I'm looking for? The overall concept is that for the most part, there isn't a need to make something new. It's how do we take the individuals that have something really special and take what that is and find a way to translate what's being done and connect that to a community of people who will either appreciate that, who are willing to engage with that in a way that will help sustain that community or those people or that product or whatever it is they're making, or how do we connect them with the people who have the know-how and resources that can then take that and turn it into something that can reach more people and or reach enough people to make it sustainable or and meaningful for everybody involved. And so that was sort of the nature of that work. And you were talking about the restaurant before. There was a restaurant, it doesn't exist anymore. It was called Noppongi Noen, and it was a restaurant that was kind of one of the places that really kind of put the whole kind of farm to table concept kind of on the map, I guess you could say. Of course, you've got lots of fancy high-end places using local ingredients and whatnot, but as far as places that actually kind of put it on stage and made it accessible, it was kind of one of the earlier places to really do that and really actually bring producers to the heart of the city and put them on stage, literally, as part of the dining experience. And so I was in there waiting tables, night after night after night, and waiting tables and serving sake and whatever. And at the same time going out and then meeting those producers and working with a lot of those producers on other projects. that were not necessarily tied specifically to the restaurants. And so a lot of those were, oh gosh, there's so many. It's where to begin, but it's
Well, you did
that
a
was
beautiful series called Just in Japan, local Japan, which I
yeah.
just, once I said it out loud just now, I just realized why it's called Just in Japan.
Yeah.
So you interview some local craft beer places or local sake breweries, and that's a great short series. How many episodes did you do?
Oh, it was only like 3. We had higher hopes for it. It didn't pan out in the way that I had hoped, but that's okay. It's funny. Yeah, I kind of forget that happened, but I mean that was probably, I don't know, 8-9 years ago maybe. And so yeah, it's what's interesting is going back and looking at it. I feel like what we're doing, it's not all that different from what a lot of places I think are pursuing right now, or really trying to bring attention to, which is interesting. From a production standpoint, there's a lot. Maybe there's still something to be desired, but it's the core there, I think, is something that is still very much relevant, just as relevant now as it was 8-9 years ago whenever we were doing that. And so yeah, I was in front of the camera kind of by default more than anything. It was kind of one of those things where and I guess this is true for a lot of my work, is I guess on stage isn't necessarily anywhere I'm trying to get to. I enjoy a little bit more behind the scenes, but I guess when it makes sense, if nobody else is going to do it, then it's kind of like, well, roll up my sleeves and I guess I'll just go do it. And then once the proof of concept is out there, ideally, then I can pass it off to somebody else to go because there's arguably more people that are better qualified to do a lot of that stuff, or whether it's to be on camera or to be shown or communicating certain things. There are people who are really, really good at those things. And so how we can create a space for people who are good at those things to be able to shine, to be able to do that. And so I guess I kind of see my role as how do I, if there's something that is being underappreciated, or in some instances that doesn't exist and it needs to, then yeah, I'll go out and do it. But then after that, hopefully I can, give it to somebody else who can really use that and utilize that and empower those people, because there's no shortage of things to do or things to work on, so.
Yeah, I'm showing the pictures of you doing a guided brewery tour right now, and I think you're very modest in saying that there's more qualified people who can talk about these things, of course, but the skill that you have as a longtime resident who has done a deep dive into these topics is being able to choose the things that will connect with the visitor, that you can see as kind of a newer local, like locals who grew up with this. It's really hard for them to see what things to point out to connect to their experience as visitors. And I think that is something you're doing really well. Great job.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's a lot of times, and you've probably experienced this as well, a lot of times, when places talk about, why are you unable to reach, a certain market or a certain consumer or a certain whoever, the first thing that comes up is, oh, it's a language issue. We don't have the resources, the language resources. And sure that's an issue, right? Anybody, if you can't read what's written or you can't understand what's being said, of course that's an issue. But I feel like 9 times out of 10, that's actually not the real issue. That's actually pretty easy to hurdle to get over, the language part. At the end of the day, it's what are you actually trying to communicate to whom? And that actually hasn't been sussed out in most cases. Putting, systematically just putting something into another language or another form, that's not hard to do. There are tools that even help do that now. But at the end of the day, what's being said and who are you actually saying it to? And that's just a process that a lot of even large businesses in Japan haven't really gone through in a way, especially if they're really thinking about the nature of their relationship with the international market or international consumers or international corporations or whatever. That's just a process that hasn't really been thought out. And so you're talking about, doing, guided tours or things of that nature. It's not just a matter of, can we get somebody who can speak Chinese or English or French or whatever to guide this tour. It's how can you create an entire program that actually communicates to a group of people who are seeking that, and so it's a much more involved process than, dropping a person in there and saying, here you go, now you know what to say, and so,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and a lot of places just don't, because it's just something a lot of people just never experienced, what it means to actually, engage in that, and suss out and figure out what that looks like. And so, as a result, a lot of organizations, whether it be companies or local governments or whatever, just aren't prepared to go through, all the work that's involved, and invest the resources. And a lot of times they don't have necessarily the resources that would be ideal, and so how do you get creative, or how do you, set goals, or set targets, that actually, connect them in meaningful ways that help meet, sort of attainable goals. And for a lot of rural areas and all these places, the goals don't have to be huge. When you're talking about small communities of a few thousand people, or, 10,000 people or whatever, being able to sell even a small number of, whether it be a certain product, at a certain price point to a certain number of people, or to bring in, only another few hundred or a couple thousand people a year to a certain place, that actually has a huge, if you're just looking at economic impact, it's significant, or it can be if it's thought out. And so, helping them understand, what goals are meaningful goals, and then how to work toward them and how to build those systems. And so it's very rewarding. It's challenging. And going through it again, it's hard because, you go from one to the next, and you're kind of going through on a fundamental level, you're going through the same process, but every situation is different, and all the people and all the resources are different. And so, getting back to the idea of community is, then how do you involve the people on the local side, because it's up to them at the end of the day, right? Coming in from the outside and saying, hey, you should do this, you should do that, you should do the other thing, yet your level of commitment is nowhere near the level of commitment that the people who are there have, who are, carrying on a craft that's been passed down for 6 generations, or, who have a family who have been, farming there for 12 generations, or who have, your level of, commitment there and just involvement is just very different. And so to actually go in there and help empower the people there based on their unique resources, and skill sets, every situation is different. And so every time it's always very, very exciting. It's always very, very rewarding. And sometimes these things go better than others. It's not easy, but it's a rewarding process.
And I think to realize that all tourists are not the same. All foreign inbound tourists are not the same. And to try to make connections on an individual level and on a regional level, right? Like you in your past, you spent a year in Italy. You took groups to New Zealand. You've had collaborations with Spain. So I think in many ways you've been able to make that connection for local people, that each visitor might not be the same. And definitely certain visitors are more valuable for your business, your rural destination, than the mass tourism. The mass tourism model is gone, hopefully. Will not come back.
Absolutely. I mean, it's although whatever the current reality of things aside, assuming we get over that hump, it'll probably exist for a certain, it's whether it's ideal or not aside, it'll probably exist in some form, in some capacity, for some segment around the world that is at that stage. There's probably a some population that maybe it's not one that I'm directly connected to, but I'm able to imagine that there is a population somewhere that would serve still, ideally, maybe it's not an ideal, but it's still out there. But it's, like, as you said, there are different needs in different places, and you can, I should say, Japan, and arguably just about anywhere, has amazing, incredible things to offer, and so just a lot of folks just don't even realize what's out there yet. People only know what's already been put out into the world, right? And so I guess that's another part of it, is how do you can piggyback on vocabulary and concepts that are already out there in order to lure a pre-existing customer or whatever, or you can put in the work to actually define something that really stands on its own and can really continue to sustain itself on its own terms, right? And that it takes a lot more work and a lot more commitment, because there's no quote unquote formula for it, especially when you're talking about smaller areas around Japan that don't have the millions of dollars in marketing and all the other resources or all these other things, I mean, but if you can commit to that, you can get enough people who are actually really committed to that and willing to nurture that over time, then you've got something that resonates, maybe not with the entire world, but with, that's going to resonate with a population that really values that and finds that really special. And, maybe the first 3 years or 5 years, you're not going to see the kinds of numbers that other, slickly produced, well-funded projects might see. But over time, that could then grow to become, again, a model that is unique on its own terms, and then actually goes on to become a standard for other people, other places.
Well, you're talking about sustainable branding, building a lasting brand that shows value. It's not just about numbers. It's not just about getting thousands of people into your area to buy souvenirs and leave. We want slow travel. We want people who care about where they're visiting, and that in balance will help locals and visitors have a better quality experience, which I think definitely is the way of the future after coronavirus, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
You've got a great quote here in your local branding article with Nippon.com, talking about sake, and because sake is made from rice and water produced on a farm, it's an integral part of religion. It's reflected in so many aspects of Japanese culture, the food, the festivals, even the cups and the bowls. So I always say, if you want to know real Japan, start with some sake. So it's so true.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess, primarily, just the nature of a lot of my work over the last probably 5 or 6 years, a good chunk of it has been rather sake centric. So I guess a lot of people think I'm kind of like one of the sake guy. I actually don't really consider myself a sake industry person, really. For me, more than anything, that's just the most exciting and engaging tool that opens up more opportunity to be more involved in all the things that really make, rural Japan, all those things just really, really special. It is not necessarily the act of just drinking or getting drunk, but it is a tool that is very deeply connected on so many levels to really all the things that are really sustaining, all the stuff that really makes Japan really, really special. All the things that at least internationally a lot of people really value and appreciate about Japan are all things that can be distilled down to sort of that, and what can be produced through sake, and sort of that relationship and what's connected there. And so, yeah, I mean, it's hard to take, say, oh, I could take my rice cooker and steam some rice and take it to a party and say, hey, look, I've got this great rice, and everybody would be happy. But I'm limited as to how many places I can take that rice cooker to and how many forms that could take, right? But you can take a bottle of sake, and then you could combine that with so many different elements, things that are both traditional, quote unquote, traditional, or not so traditional, and tie that into so many different communities and so many different places in so many different ways. And at the end of the day, it's going to tie back to something that's very, very fundamental, whether it is the craftsmanship, or the nature of how that brewery or those farmers are, integrated into those local areas and what they mean and how they serve not just their customers, but the local people around them, or whatever. For me, I'm out in Chiba, out in the peninsula here, and it's it's countryside for sure. We're not too far from Tokyo, but we're very much countryside. It's pretty much all beaches and rice fields. Not a bad place to spend a pandemic, but it's April, May, June this year. It was just such a wonderful reminder as to why I came out here in the first place. And we're really lucky where we're at, just because of the nature of, the choices that we made and the things that we've chosen to be involved in, both personally and professionally. A lot of the people around us grow food or make things or are very resourceful. And so we had access to, we spent our days in a beautiful environment having arguably some of the best food you could possibly ask for. We weren't going out and dining fancy or anything like that, but when everything was gone at the grocery store, all we had to do was pick up the phone and, drive 8 minutes down the street to go visit the local farmer and pick up the better version of that, and it's all there. And those are the same people that are, in an ideal world, having their rice then being turned into sake, and then that brewery and the people that they employ and the way that they're, tied into the local festivals and matsuri and those different things and other local businesses and the local shotengai and all these other, they're all integrated into parts of that, that community in a lot of very deep entrenched ways. So.
Yeah, great. We have a comment from Mary from the US. Thanks for joining on Periscope. She says she's been away. She's now back and watching for the New Year's special. Thanks, Mary, for joining. Tim Bunting has joined. He says, hey, Justin. I had the privilege of working with Justin on the Dewa Sanzen a few years back. Great to see you're getting on well. That's wonderful.
Hi, thanks, Tim. Nice. Well, I'll make it up there. I had several plans to make it up to Yamagata this year, and that didn't happen repeatedly, but this year for sure.
You had a cultural bridge project in Yamagata, it looked like.
Yeah, part of Yamagata and other areas as well too. Yeah, that was together with an organization based out of Italy, and part of that was getting how do you. So with and I said, and Tim was involved in that as well, and I guess a big part of that was, so you've got the city of Tsuruoka, who was selected as this UNESCO City of Gastronomy, which is fantastic, which is a fantastic achievement, right? And so all of a sudden they are thrown into having this cohort of other cities around the globe that have been given that same accreditation or standard or whatever. So all of a sudden they're getting a lot of attention for from these other, they're part of this network. They're invited to these different conventions or these other things, and then there's interest from educational institutes or research institutes or chefs or different people who want to know what that's all about. And submitting the paperwork and getting approved is one thing, and going through the process, then actually having to show it to the people who are actually coming looking for it or for very concrete purposes, that's a whole nother thing. And so and Tsuruoka is clearly amazing. They have all kinds of incredible food and products and culture and history and just beautiful things, but a lot of them are disconnected from one another, and that's kind of part of it in a way. And it's an area that's been over time, the area has gotten larger and larger, just as a lot of places have, the cities and towns have been what's the word, kappe, like they've been I can't think of the word, isn't coming to mind right now, but they get folded into one another essentially. And so it's this massive land area that stretches from, the sea to deep in the mountains. And so you've got all these really just exemplary, examples of culture and food culture and tradition, but they all existed in like kind of siloed off in small communities, these small mountain communities, or in this ocean village, or all these different places. And so all of a sudden, then you've got people from around the world who are coming saying, okay, what do you got? How do you then connect the dots and present that to those individuals in a way that resonates with them, and that they can then pick that up and say, okay, I know what this is. I can see how this contributes to whether it be good food or healthy living or whatever these different things. And then how can I then be involved in that, whether it's through food or travel or in these different things. And so the idea was to how can we then take a local network of people and then empower them with the understanding and the skills to be able to then continue to introduce that. It's a beautiful place. I'm happy to travel up there, every other week and go spend time with, wonderful people from all around the world to help introduce them to those things. But that doesn't make it much sense for the people there to have to rely on somebody traveling, 200 kilometers to come visit every time, right? So they've got, folks like Tim who are, deeply entrenched in a very specific area there. And so then how do you find, so he's one of those very crucial dots there who's able to kind of, reach over into some of those other spheres. But then you've got other people who are both Japanese and not in Japanese who are in those other different spheres as well too. So how do you start to, create that overlay where those people understand the nature of one another's work and their position in sort of that grand scheme? And then where are the individuals that are in a position to actually, once they're connected, develop those relationships and then continue to share and communicate the nature of that to the people who are looking for what that place has to offer. And so, we were up there in Sudoku for a while.
Collaboration in areas. And I think Jess Hallam's talked about this in Tohoku as well, right? Like to get the region to collaborate together, not like compete area to area, but think of the area of Tohoku as a place to spread appeal. And I think most of Japan, if we collaborate more, can be so successful at that kind of branding. Japan, rural areas as a brand that collaborates together, which is so much more appealing to visitors, for sure.
Yeah, you're starting to see, like, for example, around like Shikoku and down that way, as well as Hiroshima, Okayama. Like before that, it was here's Hiroshima, or here is Shikoku, or here is, whatever. Now you're starting to see they're starting to kind of get onto that, and you're starting to see a lot of communication around Seto Naikai. And so this is, or Setouchi, the inland sea, and sort of it's communication of, look, here's this inland channel that ties a lot of places together that have that offer a shared experience, as well as have unique qualities, dotted throughout them because of there are very different territories and different regions. So you're starting to see sort of examples of places that are starting to successfully draw those together, because
if you think of it from the visitor perspective, it's so much more appealing if I know I can do so much in an area instead of I have to go here and there to see interesting places, right? So the kind of branding for area by area just is helping everybody. So hopefully we'll see more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's even if you're, the neighboring town might be a neighboring town under a different, local, government jurisdiction or something. So for them, I can understand it's a different situation. But right, for a traveler, that's only a 15-minute drive down the road, right? So, right, it's the same 15 minutes, or it's the same, 20 kilometers or whatever. But depending on your perception, that 20 kilometers is either a different world, or it should be on my map. Why isn't it on my map? Because it's it's right there. So it's
part of that is kind of training, or the kinds of workshops and things that you're doing that I'm doing as well to encourage local people to collaborate together. So your ryokan is busy, you've got too many people at your restaurant. Why don't you suggest the next one that's not busy, even if it's in the next town? And that's such a great service to the visitors, as well as building your brand for your whole area, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But it's easier said than done, though, right? I mean, you've
Yeah.
got a lot of these areas. It's in a lot of situations they come, well, you should just do this or do that or do the other thing. You've got a lot of people who have been dedicated to a certain place, working in a certain manner, with a certain cohort of people in the area for a long time, and to immediately expect them to just go, oh, well, why didn't you say so? I mean, it's a big ask, and I think a lot of people forget that, that it really is a big ask for a lot of people to actually have to step back and say, what, so I have to actually, it's not just a matter of I'm just going to do this. We actually have to fundamentally change our relationship with all those other, potential players, and that means you're going to have to probably change how you work and how you spend time during your day, and if you look at, sake making is a great example, but sake making isn't actually that physically demanding, but it's very regimented, right? Every minute from 5:30 a.m. until 6:30 p.m., it's to the minute. Like if you pretty much, I mean, it's you're running. Everything is it's a finely oiled machine. To be able to do everything from start to finish. It functions like a just an incredibly fine-tuned machine in a certain context, and that's how a lot of places operate. That doesn't work as really it doesn't work in order to respond to the needs of a lot of travelers nowadays and the types of more organic experiences and discoveries that a lot of people are looking for. So yes, there is a need for change, but it's also, I think, our responsibility to also recognize that there's a lot of people that invested a lot of themselves in a lot of things that are tied, locally in ways that we can't even. What, I've been here for 15 years kicking around the countryside. Who cares what I have to say? I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, really, I mean, I'm pretty insignificant in the big picture. So it's.
But that's why your role is so important, because
Yeah.
you are helping to make these connections for visitors, for even local residents, to all these regions or places that are so focused on their own thing because they're doing it so well, so high quality. We want them to continue that, but we also need people who are going to connect the information and introduce that to people who don't know, right?
Yeah, yeah, and the nice thing now, and you're seeing this a lot, over the last year as well too. It's really kind of exploded even more. Is you're seeing a lot of sort of interlocal collaboration as well. Whereas a lot of times up until now, there was sort of this reliance or dependency on resources that were sort of focused in Tokyo. Oh, we need somebody who can design this, or we need somebody who knows how to, do the web campaign for this, or we need somebody, these different resources. They were still kind of dependent on what was available in the metropolis. Whereas now you've got enough examples now, even if they're not massive, there's enough of places, people, projects that have served as proof of concept for what they're able to do, and that they're actually able to create something of very high quality, and that there's enough demand for it, and they know how to access the people that will really care about it and really cultivate those relationships. And so instead of relying solely on Tokyo, you're seeing this interlocal collaboration where you're seeing people working together and supporting one another in different areas, which I think is super exciting. That's for me is a very ideal version of what the coming years looks like. Tokyo's it's great. It's an incredible city on a lot of levels. There's a reason a lot of people come and travel to Tokyo and and fall in love and walk around and have great experiences and feel good. There's a lot to love, but the reality is that everything that you love is being sustained by the people and the resources that are not in Tokyo at the end of the day. That's really what it is. And that's where that work is. That's where the people are. That's where the resources are. And so if we can create kind of a network where, interlocally, people are able to sort of sustain one another, then I feel like that becomes a much stronger, and more, for lack of a better word, I guess, more sustainable. That they're working at a scale that they're able to operate at individually in their different regions, while at the same time they're scaling to support other regions, as opposed to trying to, overreach into these big, areas or huge markets that, Tokyo or these other places with, massive resources are trying to, access. If they're able to create a model where they're able to, support themselves and one another in that way, that becomes a very appealing, example, for how to work as well as how to live. It's really exciting.
Yeah. Well, we have just another minute or so. Can you tell us
All right.
any upcoming things for you this year? What are your
Oh
aims or
gosh.
targets? Anything on your list you want to get done this year?
Gosh, there are a few things on. Sadly, the things that are kind of in the works, I can't really talk about yet, in any real detail. There are a couple actually big things kind of in the works that I really want to share, but I actually can't. I've got about 3 or 4 things actually right now that are all, in a really good place that I'm excited to get out into the world and share. But I can't at the moment. I really wish that I could.
That's
But yeah,
okay.
if you wanna pay attention to, yeah, the gosh,
People can hear some of your ideas through your Sake on Air, for
yeah,
example.
SakeOnAir, that's good. That's gonna keep going for sure. Please do. Yeah, subscribe, SakeOnAir. Check us out there. We did the Sake Future Summit last year, which was a huge undertaking and was really exciting. What that will look like this year, we'll see. It looks like the world is going to be an interesting place this year as well. So hopefully we'll be able to do something, interesting and meaningful there. That's one place where you can probably connect with me with the most frequency. But yeah, I will be. Yeah, I don't know. Facebook, Instagram, I guess. Patsuke, yeah. Keep If you kind of want to poke around there and see what I'm up to, then yeah, and probably in the next 3 or 4 months, I'll have a few things to share.
So watch this space.
This space,
Yeah,
out there,
some
some
space
space out
somewhere.
there.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Justin, for joining today and sharing your insights. It means a lot. And I think there's so much that you're doing to bridge rural destinations, local developers, local craftspeople to the outside world, and even to people within Japan. So keep up the good work. Thank you so much.
We'll figure something out. We'll just keep trucking along. Just having fun.
Thanks
So,
for joining. Mary says thank you. Thank you, Justin. Josh
thanks,
Linvers
Mary.
says nice to listen to your convo. Keep up the good work, Justin. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining. I didn't get to fit it in, but Sake Connect Melissa said she was interested to know what sake you're taking in hand when you go to somebody's place. Is it from Chiba?
Oh,
Final difficult question.
it's usually something I've had a hand in making. So yeah, I take stuff from Chiba with frequency from KidoIzumi a lot. Like I said, or from Yamagata Masamune, or from, as this year I've been carrying a lot of Benten Musume around after spending a good chunk of time with them. So it's usually something I've had a hand in. But it depends on who I'm going to drink with. So
That's great. Well, we are continuing the alcoholic theme, I guess, in a way. Talking tomorrow with Todd Van Horn about umeshu and
okay, cool,
ume distribution and branding in Japan. So that'll
cool,
be interesting.
cool.
Friday morning, we're talking about code Chrysalis with Jan
Hmm,
Fan. So that'll
cool.
be a switch, but also
Yeah,
very
great.
interesting, I hope. Yeah.
That's the world I'm curious about. I will check that out.
Nice. Yeah. Thanks,
Cool.
everybody, for joining. Thank you so much, Justin. Everybody,
Joy,
have a
thank you
good
so much.
day.
That was fun.
Yeah. Take care. And Happy New Year once again. Take care,
Yeah,
everyone.
the new year.
Bye.